consultations done online through various online platforms.
Many of us have given so much of ourselves to make sure that this happens. So methodologies have been used, a lot of strategies, many policy changes, many program trusts have been tried and tested, all for the sake of making government at all levels, national to the local, to work for the benefit of the constituents in the communities.
Under the revised 5th National Action Plan, the government and non-government partners are committed to collaborate to achieve the following. Strengthen citizen participation in governmental processes. Enhance transparency, accountability, and participation in educational service delivery. Increase government data utilization through the publication of high-quality datasets on the Open Data Philippines portal. Establishment of an efficient and effective technology-enabled participatory validation and reporting mechanism for selected government infrastructure projects that support the monitoring and evaluation policies of the department. Institutionalize transparency and accountability in the extractive industries. Passage of the Freedom of Information Law and localizing the Freedom of Information Program. Fostering industrial peace through the proactive and inclusive engagement of workers and employers in the formulation and/or review of labor and employment policies, working together to create a holistic and integrated approach to improving the lives of children and their families, ensuring Indigenous peoples' mandatory representation in local legislative councils and policymaking bodies, and stakeholders' engagement in harnessing the value of PhilJEP's data. With respect to the COVID-19 response and recovery efforts, the Presidential Communications Operations Office added a milestone to facilitate the proactive disclosure of all COVID-19 related information from national government agencies. Its co-commitment holder, Youth Alliance for Freedom of Information, has additional milestones on the conduct of consultations on the FOI bill, convening of a multi-sector network of CSO advocates for FOI, creating a tech-based tool for feedback from citizen experience on access to information, and creating a tracker of public accessibility of statements of assets, liabilities, and net worth among agencies. The Department of Education considered the distribution of computer packages to learners and educators as an additional focus area for participatory monitoring. Its CSO Education Cluster added activities related to lobbying for an increased budget for the last mile schools in succeeding years and monitoring of the domestic resources of local government for the implementation of identified critical education inputs in the last mile schools. Committed to conduct surveys among public healthcare workers on the extent of the implementation of the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act, specifically on their benefits and other entitlements.
So I call on each and every Filipino, be with us at the front lines of public sector reform. Be active citizens. And as our partners for change, let's continue to ask ourselves difficult questions. Let's listen to each other and co-create targeted and sustainable solutions. Join our crusade and let's go beyond numbers and letters, beyond complicated theories of change, beyond policy papers and lip service. Together, let's deliver felt and measurable results and make government work better for the Filipino people.
The Philippine Open Government Partnership. Open by default. Policy by the people. Accountability for results. The Philippine Open Government Partnership launched its first co-created National Action Plan in December 2019. The international open government commitments that embody the plan aim to contribute towards addressing pressing public problems and achieving a people-centered, clean, and efficient delivery of public services and building a high-trust, peaceful, and inclusive society. Consistent with this aim, implementation of the National Action Plan started at the beginning of 2020, but this was hampered by the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in the first quarter. The expected delays in implementation of action plans of member countries prompted the OGP Criteria and Standards Subcommittee to issue a resolution allowing extension of plan implementation to another year until August 31, 2022 for the end of term of the cycle 2019 to 2022. The revised Philippine Open Government Partnership National Action Plan is characterized by the same co-creation process that made the former version of the plan the most extensive and inclusive of all the action plans the country had. This revision follows the basic requirements of the OGP's Participation and Co-creation Toolkit 2. Leveraging on available technology and innovation in the midst of the pandemic, the consultation process conducted with commitment holders, non-government partners, and other stakeholders was done using different online or virtual platforms. As government and civic organization operations revert to virtual means for the communication, consultation, and collaboration aspects, the process of National Action Plan revision followed with the orientation on the guidelines of extended implementation and the succeeding bilateral meetings and consultations done online through various online platforms.
Many of us have given so much of ourselves to make sure that this happens. So methodologies have been used, a lot of strategies, many policy changes, many program trusts have been tried and tested, all for the sake of making government at all levels, national to the local, to work for the benefit of the constituents in the communities.
Under the revised 5th National Action Plan, the government and non-government partners are committed to collaborate to achieve the following. Strengthen citizen participation in governmental processes. Enhance transparency, accountability, and participation in educational service delivery. Increase government data utilization through the publication of high-quality datasets on the Open Data Philippines portal. Establishment of an efficient and effective technology-enabled participatory validation and reporting mechanism for selected government infrastructure projects that support the monitoring and evaluation policies of the department. Institutionalize transparency and accountability in the extractive industries. Passage of the Freedom of Information Law and localizing the Freedom of Information Program. Fostering industrial peace through the proactive and inclusive engagement of workers and employers in the formulation and/or review of labor and employment policies, working together to create a holistic and integrated approach to improving the lives of children and their families, ensuring Indigenous peoples' mandatory representation in local legislative councils and policymaking bodies, and stakeholders' engagement in harnessing the value of PhilJEP's data. With respect to the COVID-19 response and recovery efforts, the Presidential Communications Operations Office added a milestone to facilitate the proactive disclosure of all COVID-19 related information from national government agencies. Its co-commitment holder, Youth Alliance for Freedom of Information, has additional milestones on the conduct of consultations on the FOI bill, convening of a multi-sector network of CSO advocates for FOI, creating a tech-based tool for feedback from citizen experience on access to information, and creating a tracker of public accessibility of statements of assets, liabilities, and net worth among agencies. The Department of Education considered the distribution of computer packages to learners and educators as an additional focus area for participatory monitoring. Its CSO Education Cluster added activities related to lobbying for an increased budget for the last mile schools in succeeding years and monitoring of domestic resources of local government for the implementation of identified critical education inputs in the last mile school. PS Link Public committed to conduct surveys among public healthcare workers on the extent of the implementation of the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act, specifically on their benefits and other entitlements.
So I call on each and every Filipino, be with us at the front lines of public sector reform. Be active citizens. And as our partners for change, let's continue to ask ourselves difficult questions. Let's listen to each other and co-create targeted and sustainable solutions. Join our crusade and let's go beyond numbers and letters, beyond complicated theories of change, beyond policy papers and lip service. Together, let's deliver felt and measurable results and make government work better for the Filipino people.
The Philippine Open Government Partnership. Open by default. Policy by the people. Accountability for results.
Please all rise for the doxology and singing of the Philippine National Anthem.
Pilipinas.
Ang bituin at
You may now all be seated. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, and welcome to the Open Gov Week and to the NCIP learning session, Building Up Transparency in IP Communities. Please welcome your host and MC for today, Mr. Ulysses Espinas of NCIP.
Thank you, Ma'am Erica. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. To all the government agencies, non-government agencies, civil society organizations, thank you very much for your participation, and we welcome you to this event for today's program. Today's event is the 2021 Open Gov Week, Sustaining Open and Participatory Government in the Time of Pandemic. This is a week-long event led by the Department of Budget and Management and participated by partners with the Open Government Partnership, or OGP. For today's session, our theme is building up cultures of transparency with IP communities, and again hosted by the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples. Thank you very much, and without further ado, may I call on the Executive Director of the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, Sir Rogelio Francisco Bantayan Jr. Sir.
Thank you, Ulysses. Magandang hapon po sa lahat ng andito ngayon. At lahat ng partner ng Open Government Partners. Sa lahat ng mga ahensya na nasasakupan ng itong pagtitipon. Good afternoon. In behalf of our chairperson, Secretary Allen A. Capuyan, it is our privilege and pleasure to be with you this afternoon in this task and endeavor to participate in the Philippine Open Government Partnership, of which our agency is one of the members. This is a multi-organization tasked to journey to walk through on how to build cultures within our environment, within our offices, and for NCIP, building up cultures of transparency with IP communities. While reading this afternoon the excerpt given to this office, two ideas came into my mind. How are we going to empower IP communities to become transparent in their own ancestral domain? How are we going to incapacitate them in being leaders of transparency? Ladies and gentlemen, it is here that I want to deliver a kind of opinion that if we are trying to educate the IP communities to become transparent, we, as educators, should also be transparent with them. How are we going to give them something that is not being practiced by us? The IP communities is willing to be empowered in building up cultures ng sinasabi natin, transparency. Siguro, pag-isipan nating taga-gobyerno na paano tayo naging transparent sa mga indigenous people, sa mga communities na pinagsisilbihan natin. Panahon na baguhin natin ang pananaw na ang IP dapat ma-empower for them to build up their vast ancestral domain pinagkaloob sa kanila ng ating Panginoon. So ito lang ang aking pananaw, mga kapwa kong kagawad sa gobyerno. Kung gusto natin sila ma-empower ang IP communities, i-empower muna natin sila sa pamagitan ng transparency. Huwag na nating pairalin ang gawaing hindi tama para sa kanila. Ibigay natin sa ating mga IPs, sa kanilang community, ang tamang restoration of justice, restorations of honor, and restorations of dignity. Ibigay natin sa kanila ang kaalaman sa pag-alam sa 36 specific rights nila, kung ano yung mga bundles of rights na dapat nararapat lamang sa kanila. I am addressing this to all NCIP employees at matagal na nagsakripisyo ang ating IP communities. Matagal na sila ay inasam-asam ang masagana na buhay na mapupunta sa buhay sa kanilang ancestral domain. Subalit, hanggang ngayon, ang iba sa paggawain ay naniniwala pa na ang NCIP ahensya ang dapat magdomina sa kanila. We have been given the issues and burning issues for them to resolve. But oftentimes, we should think for ourselves that whether we are the source of burning issues and they are the recipient. So sa gawaing ito ngayong araw, sa week-long activity, ang team ay building up cultures of transparency with IP communities. Siguro, tanong natin sa buhay natin kung ano ang kultura ng transparency. Ano ang kultura ng isang community na gusto natin itayo transparency. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, I would end by saying, sa lahat, huwag na nating gawing tama ang mali. At huwag na nating gawing mali ang tama. Kung ano ang naayon sa IPRA, ibigay natin sa kanila. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat.
Thank you very much for that very good message, Sir ED, and especially on the guidance on transparency. Again, thank you so much, sir. Now to move on and to set the objectives of the session, may I call on the Chief of the Empowerment Division of the Office of Empowerment and Human Rights, Ms. Maria Victoria R. Fermento, ma'am.
To our chairperson, Alan A. Capuyan, Commissioner Jennifer Las, Executive Director Rogelio Francisco Bantayan Jr., sa ating po mga resource speakers, reactors, sa lahat po ng participants, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. As a backgrounder po, the public or the mainstream are basically unaware of the dynamics that concerns IP self-governance and empowerment. In some instances, the IPs themselves, their government partners, civil society partners, usually lead on that default mode of respect to culture and the right to self-determination without external influences. This is very important in ensuring cultural integrity, but in no way the absolute for that purpose. In some instances, this stagnates efforts for optimum partnership results when one of its objectives is for mainstream understanding and support. This can only happen if transparency and accountability could be a cultural norm for such partnerships. Sa ngayon po, sa session pong ito, meron po tayong 3 objectives. At the end of the session po, nais po sana naming ma-impart sa inyo ang mga objectives na ito. Una po, that IP communities are not as reclusive in building partnerships despite the FPIC and other norms. That building up cultures of transparency and accountability is something that partnerships with IP communities should be looked up to as a need. And last, mainstreaming in many instances is not deculturation or integration, at the expense of indigeneity. Yun po ang ating objective sa hapon ito, and we hope for a very fruitful activity. Salamat po.
Thank you, Ma'am Vic, for setting up the objectives of this session. Now, may I call on, andito na po ba si Attorney Ortega, sir? Okay po. So since wala pa po si sir, may we earnestly request to move on na po muna, and we will go back to Attorney Ortega once he arrives po. To give us a background on the cultures of transparency and accountability in engaging with IP communities. May I call on the consultant for NCIP, Energy Development Corporation, Madadma, Monuvo of Mount Apo, and World Bank, Mr. Philip Anghag. Sir?
Good afternoon from my side. First, greetings to the leadership of the Department of Budget and Management, Code NGO, the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, and all participants who are here or on Facebook. Second, my presentation will take on a point of view as an outsider looking in. I build on from my experience being with the non-government organization for the last 2 decades, at least a decade of work with development agency, in this case, the German Agency for International Cooperation, and working now with communities, a government agency, and a corporation. So the presentation focuses on culture of transparency and accountability in working with IP communities. Next slide, please. There are five focus of this presentation. First, discussion on transparency and accountability as discourses in themselves. So that would mean I would focus more on deconstructing these two terms and presenting as a counter. This is also discussion on two government systems, and in the process asking essential questions on why do we need this discussion and engaging with indigenous communities, what, when, who, and how. Fourth, I will present an emerging model on transparency and accountability here emanating from the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, but engaging other government agencies, non-government organizations, local government units, and IP communities themselves. So this model begins with the measurement of fulfillment and non-fulfillment of specific rights and duties of indigenous peoples, and tackling a bit also next steps. Next slide, please. When talking about transparency and accountability, these two words appear to me as directional. No? There are two parties that have to be considered in this discussion. First, those who engage with indigenous communities, and the who part talks about government agencies, local government units, companies, either mining, geothermal, many hydro, or any other companies working with indigenous peoples and organizations, be it non-government organization, foundations, political foundations, or community social relations of companies. The second is the IP communities themselves either look at as target or beneficiary communities of these government agencies, local government units, companies, and organizations. And on the other hand, also questioning whether or not these four actors can accept indigenous peoples as direct initiators of any activities or priority or direct users of resources within their ancestral domain or land. For me, these dual systems reveal where to place transparency and accountability. Next slide, please. The challenge, therefore, I think partly mentioned also by the executive director. The first challenge, if we frame it that way, is how to enable those who engage develop a culture of transparency and accountability. By the use of the word develop, I put into question, therefore, the fact that transparency and accountability are practices or models that we are now putting as frame in the engagement. So the question now is, how do we develop something that was not there in the first place? The second question, and in agreement with the point of the executive director, is how to capacitate IP communities to be on equal plane with or on the same level with agencies, units, and companies in discussing any intervention. Quickly, I can recall to mind many of the communities have to deal with a battery of lawyers, accountants, engineers in the negotiation process. So the question is, how can transparency be effected when one party has the technical knowledge and one has traditional and customary knowledge? How do you put that the two parties on equal playing field? No? So those are challenges that I put forward in this discussion. Next slide. So looking at those models, there are other models that are revealed to us. No, these directional relations reveal models based on global and national trends, meaning there are requirements now based on the need of other countries to engage with IP communities. And these models are based on global and national trends, but it impacts on local communities. No, it shows therefore the interconnectedness of the local to the national up to the global. No, so nobody now is disconnected. On the other hand, the indigenous communities have models based on customs and traditions. Most of these models, for example, on this decision making are flat, meaning there's no one that can decide for everybody. Everybody has voices that should be heard. Some are cyclic, meaning several loops of decision making, and that has implication on budgeting. No, for outsiders, it may appear as the process is very long, but if you respect this process of communities, then it's easier that way. No, okay. So that reveals to us a level of hybridity. No, from this discussion, there are two systems of governance that we are dealing with. One emerged from one source, no, but one assumed the systems of the colonizers, and now we are dealing as the mainstream governance systems. On the other hand, the indigenous systems tries to hold on to customs and traditions, but based on their own energies or volition, try to negotiate and reappropriate what is foreign and make it its own. No, so in this case, the indigenous communities negotiate and join actively with borrowed systems. In these complexities, we try to discuss these two terms: transparency and accountability. No, next slide, please. So when we consider two government systems, we look at what is recognized by the Constitution and the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. No? The Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act 23 years ago recognized the rights to governance and self-empowerment of the indigenous peoples. And so it recognized what was there in the first place. No? IPRA did not reinvent and put into place the governance systems of the indigenous peoples. It merely recognized what was already existing. No? How did IPRA frame this? IPRA said, the state recognizes the inherent right of ICCs and IPs to self-governance and self-determination and respects the integrity of their values, practices, and institutions. Consequently, the state shall guarantee the rights of ICCs, IPs to freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. No? So it's really clear now that a law, in this case IPRA, recognize what's already in existence. Next slide. The two government systems also show that the legal mandate of IPRA is not only limited to NCIP. Now, the legal mandates now of the different agencies, units, and organizations and companies necessitate new relational frames, no, because there's a recognition of governance. In this case, transparency and accountability are not only discourses or discussions within NCIP. These are preconditions that are set forth by the law. And so as an example, we have so many discussions now with regards to governance. No? Our local government units are the different organizations ready to accept that ancestral domains are by themselves planning units. It's not only therefore that local government units are planning units, local ancestral domains are planning units by themselves. Now, and so now it's good that DNR already in its bulletin and FLUP recognizes that, for example, if there's an ADS-DPP, it takes the place of FLUP in the formulation of CLUP. But in my experience, this is not widely accepted or known by other local government units. No? And also the enhanced CLUP guidelines talk about interfacing, meaning two phases of equal rights, and interfacing, looking at schedules or time frames in the formulation of plans. Now we also have discussion on ancestral waters, with municipal waters, and also discussions on ancestral domains and the construction of roads. So these are just some examples on where interfacing can also happen, and where these discourses are very relevant also to government agencies. No? Next slide. Now the essential questions have to be asked. We start with why. No, the why, it's built in into IPRA that we have actually, quote and unquote, two systems of governance. No, IPRA recognized the governance and self-governance and empowerment of indigenous peoples. Both are parts of our colonial past. One is far ahead in terms of its being constitution, but because of discussions and power and over history, one is not as developed as the other in terms of acceptance. No? So transparency and accountability, while models that being promoted by open government, no, and countries meeting together and forming the open governance platform also, this is very easy to see. It's very applicable in a mixed systems and can benefit indigenous peoples. Now, this is an assumption on my part and putting forward as question, no, as why. Next slide. A question on what, no? When the two governance model is deployed, all programs, activities, and projects of one government needs consent of the other. No? So there's putting them on equal plane. And so that is why, for example, FPIC as a process requires full disclosure of what are the goals of the programs, projects, and activities, not as design, meaning one designs and just consults the other, but more of how would it be designed with IPs as partners. So I have seen, for example, HAURB supporting a process where the Barangay Development Councils talks to Council of Indigenous Peoples and how they can support the data collection, because Indigenous peoples can go to the mountains and can count and wherein BDCs are only represented by one or two people. No? Okay. It also presumes that IPs are not to be approached post-design stage. Accountability now assumes a new meaning, not only to the public of the agencies and shareholders of companies. As stated by the ED, accountability of the community leaders to the members of the communities has to be considered. So accountability has to be seen on both sides. Next slide. I think last three slides. When? So when we consider these two governance models, we have to look at it from the point of view of when. So when we view it from the perspective of project cycle management, the consent and participation needs to be sought at the design stage, not at the implementation stage, which is the current mode today. Next slide, please. Essential question on who. If we look at governance systems, we also have to problematize how the indigenous communities are structured. So my proposition here is to go beyond IPOs as representatives of the indigenous communities, but look at how communities decide now and then. So I don't put a one-to-one correspondence between IPO and how decisions are made in the community. No, it is based on my understanding and experience that there are problems with regards to this. No? So we have to understand that the present IPOs are products and histories themselves, and therefore legal hybrids. And now we have hierarchical structures that try to represent flat and cyclic political structures. No? Next slide. Last three slides. NCIP is showing now, so it's me as an outsider and consultant of NCIP looking in. As I see this current research of NCIP, I see it as an emerging model on transparency and accountability. I see it as a model that can enculturate, meaning can share practices with government agencies, units, and agencies on transparency and accountability by measuring the fulfillment and non-fulfillment of specific rights and duties of indigenous people. So it's not only NCIP analyzing itself. So this model is a participatory action research commissioned by NCIP. It tries to measure two things, fulfillment and non-fulfillment of what? Specific rights and duties of indigenous peoples. It focuses on what the law provides and what IPRA provides, and also privileging and prioritizing the perspective on indigenous peoples on their duties. So for me, this is a process of enculturation. So technically meaning how culture is shared. So culture is shared by practices. So this project of NCIP is a shared practice. No, it also engages multiple perspectives, views of indigenous of NCIP employees, from the commissioners to the directors and our employees, all civil society organizations at the national, regional, provincial, and local levels, all government agencies from the national, regional, and provincial, local government units, and most especially the indigenous peoples themselves and their respective communities. Okay, last two slides. Next slide, please. And so this model looks at the mandates on service to indigenous peoples or engagement based on a multiple perspective. No, NCIP with primary mandate as given by IPRA, but all other agencies, units, and organizations also with their own mandates using other legislations, no, or their own particular constitution. And so while we have multiple mandates, we prioritize the perspective and worldviews of the indigenous peoples through storytelling as a method, no? And so probably we can have 1,000 IP narratives in up to the end of December. What would be the use of these outputs? This is hopefully can redesign or design new policies, can help in the formulation of programs, activities, and projects. No? Okay. Last slide. And so next step, based on this model, NCIP would undergo a SWOT analysis, an industry analysis, trends analysis, and scenario building. And hopefully we can create a roundtable discussion with national government agencies and LGUs on fulfillment and non-fulfillment of rights. We also hope to create roundtable discussions with NGOs on non-fulfillment and non-fulfillment of rights and duties, and engage with IPs and storytelling. And so therefore, this is my take on the topic of transparency and accountability. Thank you very much and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Sir Philip, for that very comprehensive discussion. And let me just remind our participants, if there are questions, you can put it all on the chat box. It will be discussed later by our moderator together with our resource persons. Again, thank you so much, Sir Philip, and let's move on to our next presentation. To discuss simple FPIC validation, coverage and scope in building partnerships with IP communities, may I call on the OIC Director of the Ancestral Domains Office of NCIP, Attorney Cesar M. Ortega. Sir.
Okay, Ulysses, may I be allowed to share screen?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Nakikita na po ba yung...
Sir, wala pa po, sir.
Okay. That's my problem. Even this morning, mabagal mag-share eh.
Sir, can we share na lang po for you, sir?
I think, Director Ortega, we have problem of internet. Kanginang umaga, biglang namatay. So, yan ang concern na titingnan natin.
Wala pa rin ba?
Meron na po, sir.
Okay. So sana pwede na ito. Okay. I hope that the hyperlink will work later. Um, I'm supposed to talk on the basic requirements for the free and prior informed consent. Okay, but first of all, we have to understand the concept of why we have to do this. So briefly, please indulge me if we have to take up a little bit of the background. Okay. You'll do you see it on the screen? Yung
Yes, sir. We
chart?
can see it na po.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So here owned in private by private individuals. But that is only after the same or a portion thereof has been proclaimed to be alienable and disposable lands of the public domain. So pag hindi pa siya na-proclaim, if it's not proclaimed as alienable and disposable, or sabi sa DNR, A and D, it cannot be owned yet in private. Okay, so here comes the ancestral domain under IPRA. How do you classify ancestral domains? Some claim that it is the fifth kind of public land. That is the wrong interpretation. Common by the indigenous peoples. In common. So it cannot be sold or alienated. They hold this, they own this for the benefit of future generations. So if ancestral lands and domains are private, the government is no longer in a position to give it away. Because under the concept of native title, that ownership over these ancestral lands and domains started way back even before governments were formed in our country, even before the arrival of the Spanish conquistadores. So let me see if I could activate the hyperlink. Yul, do you see it? Do you see the ancestral domains?
Wala pa po, sir.
Okay. This morning, this was my problem. It's working, but it takes a long time. So let me just read here from my source. Ancestral domains comprises lands, inland waters, coastal areas, natural resources held by ICCs or IPs communally since time immemorial, continuously up to the present, except when interrupted by war, force majeure, or displacement by force, deceit, stealth, or as a consequence of government projects or any other voluntary dealings entered into by government and private individuals. It shall include ancestral lands, forests, pasture lands, residential lands, agricultural lands, and other lands individually owned, whether alienable and disposable or otherwise, hunting grounds, burial grounds, worship areas, even bodies of water, mineral and other natural resources, and lands which may no longer be exclusively occupied by ICCs and IPs, but from which they traditionally had access for their subsistence and traditional activities. Okay. So that is the concept of native title. These are lands already owned in private by the inhabitants of our country, even before governments were formed, even before the arrival of the Spanish conquistadores. So it is private. And therefore the government, even the government has no right to dispose of it. And even government projects that have to be built on it, implemented on it, within it, have to secure the consent of the landowners. And these are the indigenous peoples. This is what Justice Puno meant by correcting an historical injustice. Okay. Now, this concept has been in existence since 1909, when in the case of Carino versus Insular Government, the U.S. Supreme Court said or, or promulgated and laid down this concept or doctrine, this native title concept. Carino was a Negro who applied for titling of his ancestral land. It was denied by our government. But at the time, decisions of the Philippine Supreme Court were appealable to the U.S. Supreme Court. So it was the U.S. Supreme Court which upheld the right of Carino as an indigenous people over his land. And this is where the concept of native title was born. 41 Philippines 935. This case was then reiterated. The doctrine in this case was Cruz versus DNR. This is the case wherein the constitutionality of IPRA was upheld. So there's no doubt about it. The concept of native title is here. It's just a matter of accepting it and embracing it. Okay. Oh, here, I have a slide pala on the ancestral domains. So yeah, please go over it briefly. What I want to emphasize is that it is just not when we speak of mountains and the timberlands, forest lands, national parks, it is not limited to agricultural lands. Another concept or important point here is that even if the ancestral domain is not being actually or exclusively occupied by the ICCs or IPs, but if they have traditional access thereto for their subsistence and traditional activities, like if it's their hunting grounds, fishing waters, then it could still qualify and form part of ancestral domains. Now, this is the indigenous concept of or ownership under Section 5 of IPRA. I invite you to just read. But I would like to emphasize the texts in red. It is private but community property which belongs to all generations and therefore cannot be sold, disposed, or destroyed. It likewise covers sustainable traditional resource rights. Okay. Knowing these things, it is now easy to understand why we need FPIC. Try to imagine a vast tract of land owned by Ayala or Manny Villar and Camellia Homes. And here comes the government which wants to introduce development, roads, bridges for the benefit of Manny Villar and Camellia Homes, but without asking for his permission. Do you think that would be any person in his right mind would invest money in the land of Manny Villar without asking permission first? Of course not, because any careless investor would run the risk of losing his investment if he would be later on ejected from the property for having occupied it and used it without the consent of the landowner. The same thing is true with ancestral domains. Whatever respect we accord Manny Villar and his Camellia Homes, Ayala Corporation and Mendez Ubel, Manny Pangilinan, Lucio Tan, Henry C., and all these big landholders, whatever respect we give them, the same respect we should give to the indigenous peoples and indigenous cultural communities within their ancestral domains. Nagpapaalam lang po tayo sa may-ari ng lupa. We cannot hide under the excuse of, anyway, it is for your own good. Anyway, this is for you. No. You cannot say that. You cannot force your development. You cannot force your projects upon a people who have no knowledge of it. So, nagpapaalam lang po tayo sa tunay na may-ari ng lupa. Ito po, pure and simple, this is basically what FPIC is all about. Free and prior informed consent. The IPs, under Section 7, Paragraph B, it can be summarized as follows. Right to develop, control, and use lands, right to manage and conserve, right to benefit and share the profits. Dito po papasok yung royalties and benefits. MWSS doesn't want to call it royalty. Gusto niya ancestral domain fees. Okay, fine. Whatever the name you call it, basta may share ang IPs. Right to negotiate. This is where MOA negotiation comes in. Right to an informed and intelligent participation. Sabi nga natin kanina, free and prior informed consent. They are entitled to financial projections. Yan ang tinatago sa atin ng MWSS ay magbigay ng financial projections. The IPs are entitled to your marketing plan. They're entitled to your feasibility studies. They are entitled to everything that you're going to do within their ancestral domain. Right to receive just and fair compensation. In case of dams are built and areas are flooded and they have to be relocated, they have to be paid and compensated for the damages they would sustain. And right to effective measures by the government. They have a right to be protected by government in case of interference, alienation. Aside from Section 7, sayang, nandito sana yung definition ng certification precondition. Let me try again. Yul, nakikita ba ninyo yung Section 59?
Yung title pa lang po, sir.
Wala yung text. Yung entire Section 59, can you see it?
Unfortunately, wala pa po, sir.
Okay. So let me just read briefly. Under Section 59, entitled Certification Precondition, all departments and other governmental agencies shall henceforth be strictly enjoined from issuing, renewing, or granting any concession, license, or lease, or entering into any production sharing agreement without prior certification from the NCIP that the area affected does not overlap with any ancestral domain. Ibig sabihin, if a project or activity is not located or will not overlap with the ancestral domain, all that NCIP has to issue is a certificate of non-overlap. No problem. But such certificate shall only be issued after a field-based investigation by the ancestral domain office of NCIP, provided that no certificate shall be issued by the NCIP without the free and prior informed and written consent of the ICC's IPs concerned. Okay. Provided further that no department, government agency, or government owned or controlled corporation may issue a new concession, license, lease, or production sharing agreement while there is a pending application for CADT. So, kahit nag-a-apply pa lang, ina-applyan pa lang ng CADT or Certificate of Ancestral Domain title ang ancestral land or domain, hindi na pwedeng mag-issue dyan ng kung ano-anong license or magawa ng kung ano-anong project ang gobyerno kung kahit ano man na private entity. Nag-a-apply pa lang, bawal na. Kailangan na magpaalam sa may-ari ng lupa. And provided finally that the ICC's IP shall have the right to stop or suspend in accordance with this act, meaning IPRA, any project that has not satisfied the requirement of this consultation process. So, what is certification precondition? It is simply an evidence that the free and prior informed consent of the IPs of the community has already been secured. It is not a government permit. I repeat, it is not a government permit. That is why we are objecting to the proposal of ARTA that the certification precondition be suspended for 1 year or be totally done away with in compliance with the Bayanihan Hilaswan Act. Kasi suspended yung mga government permits for 1 year because of the pandemic. No, it is only a proof, a documentary proof that the consent of the landowners, the IPs, had already been secured. If you disregard this requirement, getting the FPIC or prior informed consent of the IPs, that is tantamount to taking private property without due process and just compensation, which is prohibited under our Constitution. So not only will it violate IPRA, it will also violate the constitutional rights enshrined in the Constitution. Remember, private unlawful taking of private property is prohibited under the Constitution. Even if it is for public use, there should be due process and just compensation. So suspending or doing away with the certification precondition, doing away with the free and prior informed consent of the IPs is violative not only of IPRA, but also of our Constitution. Now, here are the kinds of certification that we issue. Sabi ko nga kanina, if there is no overlap, it is not within AD, then certificate of non-overlap. If it is within ancestral domain, certification precondition, which I have already discussed. Now, in the process of projects, activities, programs being conducted within ang if it's no overlap, then it's a certificate of non-overlap or CNO under Section 15 of the FPIC guidelines. If it is for large scale, well, it is a certification precondition under Section 19. Sorry. If it is for small scale, the governing provision is Section 24. The same procedure but shorter. So roughly under Section 19, at least 105 days ang naubos dito. It could be more depending on the size of the ancestral domain, depending on the location of the area, the terrain. Hindi ho biro-biro ang pag-validate, ang pag-inspect nito kasi we are talking of vast tracts of land. Hindi ito parang Pasig Quiapo o parang pupunta lang tayo sa Divisoria para magkapagsiksikan. No, it's much it's a vast tract of land. Now, itong naman sa mga projects which are community initiated or like the barangay development projects under the barangay development program, shorter ang period for getting the consent. Ito validation na lang ang ginagawa natin. These are projects under sections 39. Andyan yung community solicited or initiated sa section 39, or projects undertaken in cooperation with other government agencies. That is 40. Foreign funded undertaken with NCIP 41, and exercise of traditional resource rights 42. So in these cases, hindi na siya full-blown FPIC. Just call it validation. You just validate whether indeed these are projects that are needed by the IPs. These are projects that they want within their ancestral domains. And these are projects that would benefit them. Okay. Now, what are the operating principles of the FPIC process? Empowerment. IPs should be empowered. They should be placed on equal footing with investors, with applicants, with proponents. Why? Kung pabayaan lang po natin yung IPs, they will be bullied. They will be bullied by big business. They will be bullied by the government. They will be bullied by everybody because if I may remind everybody, the IPs are the most vulnerable sector of our society. Kaya madaling takutin, madaling ibuli. Consensus building and decision-making process. Here we observe the customary laws of the community. Customary law is paramount. It will only, the only time that state law or mainstream law will take over is when customary law fails. That's why in the decision-making process, in deciding whether or not they will accept or they will consent to a project, we do not impose on them our way of deciding. We do not tell them, madali lang yan, magbotohan na kayo, mag-secret ballot. No, we do not do that. Kung ano ang customary law nila, that is what will happen. Customary law, and we speak of IPs, is paramount. Then peace building. Cultural integrity. Respecting their customary laws is part of maintaining their cultural integrity and intergenerational responsibility. Sabi nga, it has been said that for IPs, they do not inherit their lands. They do not inherit the earth, but rather they only borrow it from their children. Intergenerational responsibility. That's why they take care of the ancestral lands and domains they have now, not for their own good, for the customary law. I have already discussed to discuss this. It's part of the FPIC. We have to be transparent and clear with our intentions, with our policies, with what we want to do within their ancestral domain. Existing property regimes, meron ba dyan mga, well, the default property regime here is the indigenous concept of ownership. That's the default property regime. And number 9, ancestral domain as a single unit. In negotiating the FPIC, every ancestral domain must be considered one unit and must give its free and prior informed consent. Example is the Kaliwa Dam. Kaliwa Dam straddles 2 provinces, Rizal and Quezon. It also has 2 ancestral domains, one in Rizal, one in Quezon. So, dalawang FPIC process po ang ginagawa dyan. FPIC process for the Rizal ancestral domain, another FPIC process for the Quezon ancestral domain. Well, this has been discussed. Dito sana papasok yung mga hyperlink. And number 4, PPPA for validation means plans, programs, projects, and activities. Okay. There are also, I have discussed this earlier, yung large scale. Ito po yan sa section 19. Extractive, intrusive, large scale. A very classic example is mining. And the hydropower projects, the building of dams. That's large scale. Ito po yung process, direct application sa regional office ng NCIP, pre-FBI conference. FBI is not the agency in the United States. It means field-based investigation. Field-based investigation. Talagang pupunta tayo doon sa sites, sa field. And preparation of working financial program. Dito pinag-uusapan, magkano bang gagastusin? At saka yung fees we paid. Then FBI proper. Field-based pupunta na yung team na mag-investigate. If they find out that it does not overlap with the ancestral domain, we issue CNO, no problem. But if it does, then we go to pre-FPIC conference. Dito na nagaganap yung mga community assemblies. Of course, with prior notice. First assembly, second assembly, and then the consensus building period. They're given a time to decide among themselves using their customary law. Kung anong napag-usapan sa first assembly, second assembly, mag-usap-usap na sila. kung papayagan nila o hindi. RNC means resolution of non-consent. Ayaw. Pwede mag-request for reconsideration. If granted, then you proceed as if they if they said yes. Otherwise, it stops there. If the MR is denied, the request for reconsideration is denied, then that is the end of it. But if it is a resolution of consent, then we proceed to the next step, MOA negotiation. Ito na yung economic benefits. Magkano bang royalty? Aside from that, what about the damages? What about the relocation? What about the new houses to be built, etc.? The damage to the crops and all that. And posting of the bond. The applicant, proponent, or investor must post a bond to secure or to guarantee their performance of their obligations under the MOA. Then RRT, regional review team. It will be reviewed by the regional office, approved by the regional director, then forwarded to ADO for final review. Then the MOA is submitted to LAW for legal opinion. The LAW will look into the legalities of the provisions in the MOA. If it's okay, then the CP application will be submitted to the Commission and Bank for approval. Once approved, the CP is issued, it will be signed. The regional direction, regional office. Ayaw na sumunod nitong kuwang ko. For non-extractive, an example of this is small-scale quarrying projects. Yan ang maraming pinaprocess ng NCIP, small-scale utilization of land, water, etc. Ito naman yung process. It's the same, only that it's shorter. Kasi hindi masyado siyang ini-investigate kasi nga it's not extractive. Simple lang yung kanyang project, hindi masyadong, the impact to the environment is not that great. So more or less, ganun din ang process. The one difference is that once it is approved, it passes the review of the regional office. But what is needed is the concurrence of the ethnographic commissioner, concurrence, and the confirmation by the chairperson. It will not anymore pass through deliberation by the commission and bank. Yan ang pagkaiba. Of course, sa number of days, maigsian din yun. Yung number of days sa pag-review, maigsian na din yun because it's not that complicated. As I already mentioned earlier, these are the processes under these sections which need only to be validated, not the full-blown FPIC. Okay. Ito ang process ng validation. Application received, the RD, regional director, the elders, submits report. Once okay, it will be signed by the RD, then concurred in by the ethnographic commissioner, then submitted to the chairperson for confirmation, then approved. So I said, no more en banc deliberation. These are the references. Ito, I included these pictures to give everyone an overview or an idea of what this field validation process, this field-based investigation, this in case of delineation, yung ginagawa ng provincial delineation team, ano bang ginagawa ng NCIP employees on the ground? What kind of terrain are they going to when they validate and investigate projects, proposed projects in the ancestral lands, ancestral domains? What is the terrain? What does it look like? Gaano ba kalayo dyan? Para lang ba yan Baclaran to Fairview? Or para ba yan Pasig to Quiapo or ito investigation and pinagagawa ng NCIP personnel. Ito, nag-survey ito, I guess this for delineation. Mabuti, hindi yan pababa, meron din yan pataas. Masukal. Pwedeng may ahas. Yan. Yung tanaw ng dagat. Yan. Not any, no houses inside. Tatawid pa ng tubig. Mag-river crossing pa. Yan, mabuti kung masalubong nila Army. Thank you. Pero kung NPA, di natin alam anong mangyari dyan. Dito sila nagmi-meeting. At kung medyo malasin, mag-overnight, dito sila matutulog. So that's it. In a very brief time, I hope I have conveyed the concept behind the free and prior informed consent. Why we have to do it, the basis of the entire concept and process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Attorney. Thank you very much for that very substantial discussion of FPIC, its process, its need, and importance for the indigenous cultural communities and indigenous peoples of the Philippines. Now let us move on our third presentation regarding IP community perspectives on partnership and transparency and implications to empowerment, to be presented by the Executive Director of Mindanao Indigenous Peoples Council of Elders and Leaders, MIPSEL. Let us all welcome Datu Bawan Tagainod. Good afternoon, Datu.
Good afternoon. Pwede po ba ma-attach yung presentation at your end?
Yes, sir.
Sige. Regarding sa perspective ng IPICC communities dito sa Mindanao, regarding sa topic ng accountability and transparency, mag-share na lang kami ng isa sa mga best practices na nangyayari dito sa Mindanao na relevant sa usaping accountability and transparency. Ito yung experience ng Ubu-Manobo tribe sa Davao City regarding sa pakipag-engage sa government agencies and private sector, no, doon sa kanilang pag-develop at pag-preserve ng kanilang ancestral domain. Next slide, please. What is important here is the community's clear definition kung ano yung rights, duties, and obligation nila, or what is important to them. For example po dito, ang dinefine ng community yung kanilang tinatawag nila na pusaka o yung concept ng kanilang pag-protect at pag-develop ng kanilang ancestral domain. Next slide, please. So they call it the Apo Sandawa or Mount Apo. They call it the Grand Pusaka or secret place to the tribes. Next, please. So what is Pusaka? Next. So this is their definition. Important items that has cultural significance, economic importance, historical value, and life itself. Next. So very clear to the community that this pusaka cannot be bought or given away. Next slide. Next, please. Should not be abandoned and neglected and part of the indigenous culture and identity. Next slide, please. From that definition, it is the community themselves, no, that identify their what they want to do with their ancestral domain and what kind of partnership that they need. Next. So the community, particularly the indigenous political structure, must be properly consulted. So how do they say their ancestral domain? What kind of intervention do they want? What ito yung mga question, what is the state of our ancestral domain? What do we want to achieve for our people, land, and resources? Then how can we convince others on helping us achieve these aspirations? Next, please. So this is their ancestral domain. Next. 17,975.33 hectares. They declared it pusaka. Next slide, please. Next. So these are the things that are important to them. The water. Next slide. The river systems, the forest. Next slide, please. Oh, the fauna and the animals and the plants. Next slide. Next slide. Next. So what are the plans of the community? So they plan how to develop those So there are 4 barangays, no, crafting their own protection and development plan. So they identify the projects, and it is the community that plans, that draft the plans for the development of their ancestral domain. Next slide, please. This is their duty. It must be also considered the duty and obligation of the community under the IPRA law. Next. From there, they already identify what kind of livelihood intervention that they want, or help from the outside or from other partners. Next. 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 Next, please. So this is what they want to do. This is their interest. No, they presented it for all of us, those who want to assist, who want to help, who want to be partners with the community. So very clear yung kanilang gustong mangyari. So from there, meron silang mga ginawang mga activities like forest gardening initiative. This is in engagement or in partnership with the local government unit of Davao City, the Davao City Water District, and the UP, the UP Mindanao. Next, including the ANR. Then they have different livelihoods in partnership with local government and other agencies. Next, please. Then they have a partnership also with a private company, tapping resin from Almasiga. Next. So they organized themselves, then entered into MOA with partners, no, with a clear definition of their what they want and what they want their partners, what kind of help or assistance they need. Next. So they form a council, no, for that specific, the Pusaka Council. Next. This is the partnership with the local government unit of Davao City and other stakeholders. Next, please. So with also other partners in the livelihood, with DNR, with their Bantay Kalikasan, Bantay Bukid. Next, please. So it's just a sample showing that the IPICCs can partner not only with local government units, not only with government agencies, but even with private, no, whether it is on the business or civil societies. The most important is for us, no, those who want to partner with IPICCs, is to know the community, know their rights, know their duties, know their obligations under the IPRA law, and know the processes that are involved in establishing partnership with the IPICCs. That's all of my presentation. I think Attorney Agyu, Jerry Agyu is here, who knows this project of the Ubumanobo tribe. Dato Joel also is part of these participants, so they can also give their inputs during the question and answer. So that's end my presentation on the topic of what is the perspective of the IPICCs, especially here in Mindanao, in terms of transparency and accountability in partnership with IPICCs. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone.
Thank you so much, Dato, for the presentation. Now, may I call on our moderator for the open forum, Mr. Joni Mingilian of the Office of Empowerment and Human Rights of NCIP. Good afternoon, sir.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone. Nandito pa po ba tayo lahat? Dito po sa open forum portion of this activity, we are going to have our resource persons. Samahan po sila ng ating Commissioner for Central Mindanao, Buy Jennifer Pia Limpain Sibog Las. At yung ating mga resource persons, narinig nyo naman po sina Sir Philip, pagkatapos sina Sir Attorney Ortega, at saka si Dato. Ngayon po, may mga questions na nakarating po sa atin at ito ay isa-isahin po natin. Ang sources po nito ay yung sa pag-registration. Pangalawa po ay yung sa Facebook live streaming. At yung pangatlo dito mismo sa chat. So kung kanino po nababagay o kaninong presentation ang nababagay sa tanong ay siya pong ating tatawagin. Ngayon po, ang unang tanong na natatanggap natin ay how do the tribal justice system works in the IP community? How do the tribal justice system works in the IP community? Patungkol po sa tanong na to, ang sasagot po ay si Commissioner Sibog. Pero bago po ang lahat, ipakilala ko lang po siya na siya ay kilala sa kanyang advokasya at serbisyo sa empowerment ng IP communities, especially on rights and culture, awarded as Mrs. Asia Pacific Queen of Hearts Foundation, awarded as natatanging kababaihan na nagtatanggol sa karapatan ng mga katutubo 2019 at the Gawad Filipino Awards awarded as Hero of the Year 2020 at Tagawad Filipino Awards Night. Ilan lang po yan sa kanyang track record bilang IP leader. Ngayon po, Commissioner Las.
Yes, Sir Joni.
Yes, ma'am. Uulitin ko po ang tanong, how do the tribal justice system works on the IP community?
Okay.
Yun po ang unang tanong ng ating, isa sa mga tanong na dumating po sa atin.
Good afternoon to everyone. Mapian mapon kaniyo langon, especially to Sir Edi na andito ngayon sa ating katuwang sa pagserbisyo, ang ating DBM partner, Sir Philip Anghag at kay Atty. Ortega at sa lahat po ng mga kasamahan natin sa NCIP. Magandang hapon at sa mga nanonood rin po sa programang ito. We all know very well that our culture is not static. No, our culture is evolving and is changing, and from traditional nagkakaroon na siya ng transition ngayon to modernizing. However, kung titignan natin yung justice system ng mga katutubong Pilipino, mapapansin natin na sila mismo ang humahawak nito. The holders of our justice system is our IPS. They are our culture bearers, our history keepers, our traditional practitioners, as well as sila rin yung ating promoters of peace. So dito sa ating justice system, meron tayo sinasabi na ang hustisya o kulturang batas o our justice system, ang sinasabi nila, it's restorative in nature. And then it also promotes peace in our communities. And so pag gumagamit po tayo nito, lalo na yung mga customary laws natin, which is provided for under the IPRA, na kailangan gamitin ng ating mga communities, especially when there's conflict. That's very clear in Section 65 na when there's conflict between IP to IP, what would prevail is our customary law. And so ito yung customary law natin. That's why it works in our communities. Kasi ito po yung nagdadala ng kapayapaan. Through our customary laws, na ang may hawak nito, usually ang sa Central Mindanao, ang humahawak nito yung mga fulongs, mga teamwise, mga datos natin. Pag may mga gulo po sa kanilang mga community members, what they usually use is their customary laws. Before they use yung state law, they would rather resolve these issues and conflicts within their community o mismo dun lang sa council nila. In the Ubo Manobo tribe, we have what we call yung standard sa amin, or yung ang tawag namin dito is Povian Moy Gantangan. Ito yung ginagamit namin na customary law. Marami pong hindi nakakaalam. Ang akala nila, pag customary law, wala kaming abogado, which is not true. Because in our Povian Moy Gantangan, meron kaming tinatawag na MELO. Ang isang aggrieved party po, bago po siya dumiretso sa judge o yung justice na sinasabi natin, yung tausoy ng justice system, yung baway to tausoy, yung sinasabi nila, yung Council of Elders, ay naghahanap po muna yung aggrieved party ng isang abogado, and we call the lawyer o yung parang the one who will act as counsel or will defend yung aggrieved party is called Melo. Tapos later on, yung isang party then will also have to look for his own counsel, and those Melos will speak for the parties involved, and they are the ones to bring also those issues to the Council of Elders, and then the Council of Elders would also resolve these issues and concerns through consensus building then. And there's also imposition of penalties. However, ngayon, nakikita natin even sa communities, kahit na meron tayong mga hidwaan o mga conflict, ang imposition of penalties, minsan meron ng monetary consideration kasi kesa naman yung mga agong na sinasabi nila na ini-impose, wala na po. So usually kino-convert na nila to monetary consideration. So I believe, no, going back, yung sinasabi ko, our culture is evolving. Pagdating sa justice system natin, kahit na sabihin natin na meron ng state law, a lot of people, kahit na nagiging modern na siya, ginagamit pa rin to at ini-interface siya with the state law to maintain the peace in our community. So that's all, Sir Joni. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. At may audio po. May audio po ba ako? Hello, thank you very much. Okay. Ngayon po, yung tanong nagtatanong dito po si J. Antilocab, what are the requirements for applying CADTI? Isa yan sa mga advanced questions. And sumagot sa general chat box si Director Ortega. May mga steps siyang nakalatag po doon. So, J. Antilocab, nandoon po yung sagot ninyo sa general chat box po natin. Ngayon po, may mga tanong po katulad ng patungkol sa LRA. So tinanong dito na has the LRA and other agencies like the DAR, Department of Agriculture, DNR justified the indefinite suspension of issuances of CADTIs? If lands are private, the JAW number 2 has no legal leg to stand on. Attorney Ortega, so this question has to do with the ancestral domains. So ulitin ko po, has the LRA, other agencies like the DAR, DA, DNR justified the indefinite suspension of issuances of CADTIs? If lands are private, the JAW number 2 has no legal leg to stand on. Director?
Yeah.
Sir. Dinig po namin kayo, sir. Actually, that was a form of the question.
Thank you. First, the drafted. Hello?
Come again. Hello, sir.
Can
Come
you hear
again.
me?
Narinig ka namin, sir, pero medyo putol konti.
Okay, ganito rin, medyo, okay.
Okay na po.
Okay.
Na po.
First about the JAW2, that's still being negotiated.
Yes, sir.
I have been attending meetings among the DNR, LRA, and DAR it's being moderated by the Office of the CABSEC, I believe, sa Malacanang. Wala pang kwan dyan. It's ongoing yung talks in JAW2. The reason why we have JAW2 is because JAW1, NCIP withdrew from JAW1. So actually, there is no justification for the suspension of the registration, not issuance. Ang nag-i-issue po, ang nag-i-issue ng CADTI and CALTI is NCIP. Ang naapektuhan po dito yung registration with LRA, because under JAW1, before the CADTI or CALTI can be registered, it has to be, the technical description should be submitted to the DNR, LRA, and DAR for them to project the technical description on their maps to see if there are overlaps, kung merong mga titled properties na dyan sa ancestral domain. We should remember that the ancestral domains are subject to Section 56 of IPRA, meaning, ang sabi sa Section 56, pre-existing rights which are already existing and which are already vested before the effectivity of IPRA should be respected. So kung meron dyan mga titled properties, yun po ay sinesegregate at tinatanggal sa ancestral domain, kaya nagbabago ang technical description at magpapa-approve ulit sa NBank ng bagong technical description before it will be registered. So ang nasuspend lang dito, ang not really suspend, NCIP, ang stand ng NCIP is we should continue on registering. Ang ito lang na-apektuhan yung registration, not the issuance. Under Section 52K of the IPRA to the LRA for registration. If the LRA wants to annotate, kung meron dyan mga existing titles, i-annotate na lang, but it should issue the title. That is our stand, our direction. Now, in the JAO2, I also said today, sabi ko sa JAO2, if you're just going back to kung sabihin ninyo na i-register na lang yung i-annotate na lang yung mga existing claims dyan, going to be like, I want forget it, we're not going to sign it. So, ito pa, if lands are private, the JAO2 Section 56. Section 56 says we have to respect prior existing. Thank you.
Hello? Hello, sir?
Nakuha niyo yung sagot ko. Yes, I hope narinig niyo yung sagot ko.
Medyo naglalag po yung inyong yung response.
Ganito na lang. I will.
Sige, sir.
Kaya look, I will put in the chat box yung sagot ko.
Okay. Thank you very much. So, yung mga ibang questions, sir, that has to do with the Ancestral Domains Office, yung iba na hindi sa chat box, ilalagay din po namin sa chat box. Then after ng activity naman, we are all going to generate responses to questions that we receive during this activity. And lahat naman ng members, they are going to do that for this activity. So, sir, medyo alanganin talaga ang unless yung ibang resource speakers natin or even personnel from the Ancestral Domains Office could supplement the statement of our director, then feel free to do so. Or Dato or Philip? Hello? Okay. Medyo yung mga questions that has to do with ancestral domains, as again I've said, will be responded to in the chat box. Kaya ipo-forward natin yung ating mga ibang questions dito sa chat box. Now we open those who would like to ask questions that has to do with the presentations made a while ago, except for the ancestral domains, as indicated, medyo mahina yung signal. Please feel free to raise your hand or indicate that you want to ask questions or gusto niyo po magtanong. At tatawagin namin po ang pangalan nyo kung halimbawa nakikita namin nag-raise hand kayo, then as much as possible we're going to accommodate. Okay, I see Miss Kat. Miss Kat, you have anything to add regarding the presentation or the questions in relation to the Ancestral Domains Office? Actually, may isa pang question for the Ancestral Domains Office. Ito ay hindi pa nalagyan ng sagot sa chat box. Isang question is, do the IPs lose the rights over ancestral land domains in instances when the relocation is deemed necessary? Ang mga IP ba ay nawalan sila ng karapatan sa kanilang lupaing ninuno sa pagkakataong kung saan ang relokasyon ay sinasabing kinakailangan?
Sir, can I answer that?
Yes, sir.
Para di ko nilagay sa chat box? Of course not.
Okay. Go ahead, sir.
What happens is that the IPs temporarily surrender possession of the property. What happens is the IP's possession of the affected property. but they do not lose ownership. They do not lose ownership.
Okay. I okay. Any more questions? How about questions for the other presenters? Are they clear? Maliwanag ba masyado to the point that we have no more no questions for them even?
Sir Johnny,
Yes, sir.
may dagdag lang ako doon sa regards sa relocation.
Yes, sir, Philip.
Okay. May specific cases tayo na sa Region 10 and Region 12, no? When Mount Apo nagkaroon ng earthquake noong October ng 2019, na relocate yung indigenous peoples, no? Magandang lesson ito sa government agencies, nag-support ang NHA, ang city, pero ang problema lang yung joint na relocation plan na ginawa, ang relocation area nila malayo sa kanilang farm and therefore nagdulot din ng problema sa livelihood. No? So whenever ma-displace ng indigenous peoples, I think it's good for other agencies to plan together, no, para makagawa ng relocation plan. Mas mahirap yung paisa-isa, confused ang nasa community kung kanino lalapit para sa kuryente, paano sa livelihood since they have to spend so much money every day to go back to their farms. No? So, ganun. Hindi nawawalan. I agree with attorney ng ADO, pero ang problema doon yung relocation plan. No? Sino ang magti-take ng lead. No? Pag paisa-isa ang dating ng intervention, magkakagulo din ng community. Yun lang po. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sir Philip. Si Director Ortega actually nagsumagot na rin kanina. Naku, lalong dumami yung mga questions sa ancestral domains dito sa ating chat box. Attorney, if you feel...
Hello?
Here are some... Yes, ma'am?
Yeah. Can I request?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah. Actually, from the point of view of the education sector,
Yes, ma'am.
My question is, how can we help, restore and ensure the promotion and preservation of our cultural identity, especially of the IPs? And then how can education also promote awareness to non-IPs, to non-IP people, for example, in the lowland, that they need to be abreast and to become aware and empowered also on how to defend the self-determination struggle of our indigenous people over their ancestral lands. I'm coming from the perspective of an educator, since we are in a partnership, Ma'am Jennifer is sitting with us in the education cluster of the OGP. This is one of our concerns, since most of our learners hail from geographically isolated areas where our IPs are, where the marginalized, vulnerable, and excluded members of our society are in. So this is our concern, and we would like to be of help to our people, to our indigenous people, and to the rest of the Filipino people, that they should be aware of the rights of the indigenous people, to their right to self-determination and to their ancestral domain. Thank you.
Hello, Commissioner Jen. Can you respond to that question? Ma'am Flora, ang nag-question po si Ma'am Flora ng Arellano. The question, if I'm not mistaken, has to do with IP identity. Especially when coming up with with a curriculum that has to do with the education, with education. Am I right, Miss Ma'am Flora?
Actually, it's not only
Yes,
uh,
ma'am.
it's not only the curriculum, no, but
Yes, ma'am.
the entire education content, no, for the IPs.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to IP communities, it has a native language, no, that should be considered. And since most of our teachers are not are only knowledgeable of the prevalent dialect or language like Cebuano or Bisaya or whatever. So it's not only on the curriculum aspect, but the whole sense of promoting and preserving the cultural identity of our IPs.
Hello. May I request a response from the resource speakers?
Mr. John?
Yes, Sir Philip.
Mas proper na ang sagot sa NCIP but quickly lang dun sa ginagawang research ng NCIP, nandun din yung portion na ma-engage no ang hindi lang ang government agencies, local government units but also academic institution. No, we've started Ma'am Flora with the Legal Education Board and PILJA, and hopefully sa next activities no makasama ang academic institutions on asking paano po yung fulfillment and non-fulfillment of the specific rights para mas matugunan no yung concern ninyo. But on the other part, I think institutionally mas maganda na NCIP ang sumagot.
Yes, thank you, Sir Philip.
Hello, good afternoon po.
Yes, ma'am.
Esther Lignacian ng NCIP Ifugao,
Yes.
reassigned at Isabela. I would like
Yes,
to
po.
respond to Ma'am Flora's query regarding
Go ahead po.
transmission of indigenous knowledge systems and practices in coordination with the Department of Education and other academies. For us in Ifugao in 2009 until 2012, we tried to incorporate our IKSPs, yung mga focus na themes ng IKSPs sa DepEd, sa basic educational curriculum ng DepEd, in tandem with our IK holders, indigenous knowledge holders, as well as teachers, retired teachers, and active teachers in coming up with yung appropriate na educational, yung basic BEC. Yes, so we had small books and big books with DepEd. As for the tertiary level education, we did it with the Ifugao State University. So may mga maliliit po na siguro negligible na experiences ang provincial offices of NCIP with the academe regarding the incorporation of the indigenous knowledge and systems into the formal educational system. We also did yung informal with NGO, the Save the Ifugao Terraces movement, but siguro ibang level naman yun. Mas siguro si Ma'am Flora ay interested sa formal transmission of indigenous knowledge. Thank you po.
Actually, ma'am, yes, sir.
Sige, ma'am. Go ahead.
Actually, ma'am, we are not only interested in the formal landscape of our education system. We do also alternative learning system
where we want to reach out, no, the IPs. Actually, one of our major concerns in our in the Philippines, no, is IP education. So we have also networks in the Cordillera where myself, no, had been a literacy numeracy trainer during the time of Makliing Dulat. And then we have also networks in the south, no, we with members with our NGO members in the farm areas, and then in Davao also, no, and in South Coast. So we are not only interested in the formal system. Actually, this IP education should be embedded in the pre-service education in our higher ed, no, in our tertiary education, so that the would-be teachers are knowledgeable of the situation and cultural heritage of our IPs. I don't know if there are already specific course or subjects for IP education in the tertiary level, or it is only part of a course, no, like sociology or anthropology. But I don't think we have a specific course for IP education.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for the sharing. Actually, would like sana na medyo mahaba pa yung time na binigay sa atin, but as partners of the Open Governance Week, we are given this slot at saka limited siya. But we have actually listed all the questions. And regarding the query, regarding the about the presentations, tatanungin po natin yung ating mga resource persons if they will allow us to send you copies of the presentations, electronic copies. So ilagay na lang ang email, pero kausapin po muna natin sila kung magbibigay sila ng ano. So I'm going to give you the microphone po ulit sa ating host, si Sir Ulysses Espinas po. Thank you very much po.
Thank you very much, Sir Johnny Mingilian, for facilitating our open forum. And thank you very much din po sa ating mga resource persons for answering the queries. If there are queries that aren't answered, rest assured we can answer it naman po to our Facebook. You can email us po your email address for us to respond. So yun po for our synthesis. And
Sir Yul,
may I call on
Sir Ulysses
of the Office of Empowerment and Human Rights, Director Reynaldo Dingal. Sir?
Thank you, Yuli. Good afternoon, everyone. Just like in other programs, kung may umpisa, meron ding pagwawakas. But in this Open Governance Week, it's a long week activities po na nakahilera po para sa ating lahat. Okay, for the synthesis and the next stop for this program. Okay, thank you for the nag-prepare dito sa may synthesis. Okay, next page please. Next slide please. Next slide. Okay, taka, masyado na sumobra. Okay, for the synthesis of this activity, of course, the program was started by the opening remarks or welcome message by the Executive Director by mentioning his all-out support to the Philippine Open Governance Partnerships. And hopes that sinabi niya na huwag gawing tama ang mali at huwag gawing mali ang tama. Yeah. Yan palagi ang mantra o laging sinasabi ng ating Executive Director whenever he gives a message in any program or any activity. And then the next part of that is the objectives and purpose of this program given by the Empowerment Division Chief, Ms. Maria Victoria Pormento, and she presented the 3 objectives. Next, to sila yung that IP communities are not as reclusive in building partnership despite the PIC and other norms. Second objective is that building up cultures of transparency and accountability is something that partnerships with IP communities should be looked up to us and need. And number 3, the mainstreaming in many instances is not the culturation or integration at the expense of indigeneity. Okay, next slide. Okay, on the lecture of or discussion of Mr. Philip Anghad, he discussed the transparency discourses, challenges, and rebuild modes. He also discussed the legal recognition of rights and governance and the discourses to be faces. Next. And on the discussion of Dato Bawan Tagenod or Sir Jake, he discussed that on the pusaka, which means important items that has cultural significance, such as musical instruments, economic importance, such as hunting grounds, historical value, such as ancestral domain and life. Sa kabuuan, ito yung wildlife na sinasabi niya. The pusaka cannot be bought or given away, should not be abandoned or neglected because they are part of indigenous culture and identity. This binds the IP as IP themselves. Okay, next. He also presented that the community development of the 4 project areas, which stipulates the plans of the community for different sectors. The community development plan for environment, livelihood, health, sanitation, and culture. Okay, next. On the presentation of Attorney Ortega on the FPIC process, he presented the revised guidelines on the pre-prior informed consents and related processes of 2012. He explained that public domain does not ancestral domain. He cited the Carino versus Insular Government case and Isigani versus DNR et al. So we have learned na hindi pang-5 sa categories ang ancestral domain. So, okay, next slide. He also cited the legal basis of the PIC as well as he discussed the different kinds of certification, which is the CNO, the certificate for non-overlap, and the certification precondition. He also presented the kinds of processes, projects, and were explained. They are the CNO, large scale or the so-called extractive projects, the small scale projects or the non-extractive ones, and the projects, activities, and programs for validations. Okay, next. So yun lang, and on the later part, nagkaroon tayo ng open forum which were ably answered by our resource persons. So with this, ang NCIP ay nagpapasalamat sa lahat ng mga participants na nagdumalo sa hapon na ito, and we are looking forward for more engaging activities dito sa open government partnerships. With that, marami pong salamat in behalf of the management of NCIP. Good afternoon, everyone. Back to you, Yuli.
Okay. Okay na po, sir. Thank you very much po, Ma'am Erica.
Sir Yuli? Sir
Yes, po.
Yuli?
Yes, sir. Yes, Director.
Sir Yuli?
Yes po, Director.
Ikaw lang, lahat ng questions, I already answered them sa chat box.
Yes, thank you very much,
But
Attorney.
if there are any other questions, I also gave by email para maka-email na lang nila ako kung may tanong pa sila.
Yes po. Thank you po for the participants. Please take note of the email of Director Ortega if you have any more questions or further clarifications regarding our discussion. So yun po, thank you very much po to all of our participants, to all of our resource speakers, and everybody who is watching sa Facebook at saka dito po sa Zoom. Yun po,
Thank you
bye-bye
very
po.
much.
Please.
Thank you very much po, Tinglayan Service Center and CIP Kalinga.
Thank you po, everyone.
Hello, this is Jennifer from the OGP Secretariat. So please provide your feedback through our post-event survey. The link is provided on screen. And the next slide, please. You may also join our upcoming session. So we have 3 sessions for tomorrow. So in the morning, we have session on open contracting. It's from 10 a.m. to 12 noon. In the afternoon, we have a session on Project DIME, extending results-based M&E through participatory monitoring. And in the afternoon again, from 3:30 to 5, we have mainstreaming and optimizing extractive disclosures through data management tools. So please do join them. It's at 3:30 to 5 p.m. tomorrow. All these links are provided in the FB page of Philippine OGP. Maraming salamat po at magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Maraming salamat po.